What I'd like to do in this time period is to talk a little bit about wireless vulnerabilities, and wireless has a number of vulnerabilities. This one's going to focus on WEP, and I think you can probably extrapolate a lot of what goes on from WEP to other security procedures in this thing, and some of the things that we want to do that we can do are effective, and some of the things are not effective. So the wireless LAN vulnerabilities, chapter 2. The first one is explain the main 802.11 security protections. Second objective, describe the vulnerabilities of the 802.11 authentication. And authentication in this case is going to be the authentication of the wireless access point, because we, unlike in a wired network, can't lock the doors and determine who's actually plugged in to the system. The wired MAC address filtering probably a little bit more effective than is the wireless MAC address filtering. Tell how address filtering is limited. It's going to be limited because, like we talked about in the last chapter, anybody that can see your RF signal can see what you're putting in that RF signal. Some of it may be encrypted, some of it may be encrypted, but eventually you're going to have some header information that's going to be unencrypted, and you can use that to find out what you want to do with these things. The vulnerabilities of WEP, and they go on and on and on. WEP is considered not to be used, so with that we'll still talk about it as part of the history of the thing. So the basic protections are divided into three categories: access control, wired equivalent, privacy, WEP. WEP being the original. Now we can talk WPA, WPA2 with these things, in authentication. And authentication in this case is not authenticating the user, but authenticating the computer, the client, so that it can actually connect to the wireless access point. And we need to do that in order to protect the network, who can actually get on the network, because as we've seen, we may get into situations where our wireless access point is inside the firewall protection, so that we are not going to be able to protect our network. Access control, restricting access to resources. We know that intended to guard the availability of information by making it accessible only to our authorized users. By limiting the device's access to, in this case, our wireless access point, limiting who can actually get there. Access point, what it is a device that contains an antenna, a radio transmitter, receiver, and an RJ45 port. We're talking here about access points and not routers. We can make a router an access point. It acts as a central base station for the wireless network. What I've done is going to get pictures of an access point here, and a wireless router here. And notice the difference is in the wireless router we have this WAN port, which goes to the internet. Over here we simply have a single RJ45 connector, and our wireless signal goes out and connects the wireless clients to our local area network. If we wanted to make this wireless router an access point, we could simply connect to one of the switch ports. And what I've done this, I use it to extend the reach of my network at home into the basement, which is far from the router that's on the second floor, and sometimes the signals are inadequate, or if I want to go out around in the yard outside, I need a stronger signal down there. Run a wire from the switch to the basement, plug the switch upper level switch into the lower level switch. Now what you need to do is go in and disable the DHCP server on the router. And once we've done that, we're not going to be giving out addresses. We then connect our clients to the antenna, not to here, to the antenna, and it goes through the switch port back to the other router and gets its IP address there, putting it on the network. So you can use it that way in that circumstance. And here's their picture of their wireless access point. And you notice that it in fact has the connection to our network. And the wireless clients connect to it. So they're going to get IP addresses on this network up here, on our network here, so that we're all now members of the same network, have access to the same resources. And again, you can buy an access point which does that. Doesn't have the router capability in it, or you can take a router and basically disable, don't use the routing capabilities of the system. Almost all APs implement access control through media access control filtering. What I want to do is bring in my packet tracer linksys router, and in it we would just go into wireless and then media access control. We would enable it, and then we have the option here to prevent PCs listed from accessing the network, or permit the PCs listed to access the network. Difference is whether you want to permit everything and then restrict, or permit nothing and allow. What you will have to do, and an issue comes up if you have a large number of devices that you want to allow. If we prevented them and wanted to allow them, you've got to type in each of these things. The other thing that could be an issue is if you have visitors and you have MAC address filtering enabled, and then you've got to then put those visitors into the MAC address list to allow them to have access to your network. The other thing to consider is it can be not all that effective, because if we sit down and using some basic monitoring tools, Wireshark on a Linux machine, then we can watch all the traffic at layer 2, which we can't do in a Windows machine, and find ourselves some MAC addresses that work, and simply clone the MAC address. There's a number of softwares that are available in order to clone the MAC address, so you just find one that you need that's on the list and make that your own MAC address. So there's a number of, yeah, it may work and yeah, it may not work. I mean, it would work for people that are just kind of driving around looking for networks to connect to. Somebody that actually is dedicated to hacking your network is probably not going to stop them, because they're going to have the tools that they need in order to find those. A device can be permitted or denied into the network, permitted or prevented into the network, as we saw in the little router simulator, and that's actually the way a linksys looks when we look at those, or that particular linksys anyway. Should not be confused with access restrictions. Access restrictions can limit user access to the internet, and we can have some access restrictions. Let me bring my little router back here. We have access restrictions here that we can edit the list. We can create some policies that apply to this thing. Keywords, applications, only 3 applications can be blocked by the policy. What do we want to block? And we can do this based on times. We have to delete this entry application in gaming. What we want to do, here we have FTP, things that we may or may not want to do from something. It says to IP address, extranet port, internet port, the protocol, and then we enable what goes on to a particular IP address. So we do have some ability to control what users can and cannot do from our router. The thing that we probably would want to use instead of the router to do that, because it may get busy and have enough to do on its own, is maybe use a proxy server or something like that in order to do those things. The access control, we're going to use MAC addresses. MAC address is going to be our 48-bit address that is unique to each NIC, each network interface card. It comprises two parts. First, we have the OIU, the organizational unit, and each manufacturer gets one or several of these. If you look up Cisco, there's going to be a whole bunch of them because they've been making NICs for a long time. This will help identify who did it and then who made it. And then over here we have actually an individual address block or a serial number. And taken together, 48-bit address makes this unique. If it's not unique, you're going to get some really strange indications. I'll digress here a second. I did that one time on some virtual machines. Instead of copying them, we moved them, which meant that they should be unique. When we started trying to use the machine, sometimes they would connect, sometimes they wouldn't connect. When we ping, sometimes it would ping, sometimes it wouldn't ping. When we finally did an ARP -A, when we looked at the IP MAC address correlation, we found that we really had a problem. We had a whole bunch of NICs with the same MAC address, and that's why we would get a sometimes it will and sometimes it won't. This is the access control, some things that you can't see. This is back to the Linksys that we were talking about. We went into wireless in it, back into the, I'll bring our little Linksys back over. In the wireless, we have basic settings, and this is a simulator, so not everything is activated in it. Wireless security, whether we want to turn security on or off, we have web, WPA personal, WPA enterprise, WPA2 enterprise, or personal, and WPA2 enterprise. We'll get into enterprise security later in the class. What we're really talking about here is using things like radius servers and 802.1x in order to, and as well as certificates to authenticate the individual computer, and then we'll ask the user to put in a username and password in order to authenticate them. So we looked at MAC filtering here, and then we have advanced wireless authentication type, and then in this simulator, this is one that we're not really going, because we don't have it authenticated. The grayed out means that it's not going to be available to me. So keep out only those devices. This is the MAC filter that we looked at. Keep them out or let them in, whichever way you want to do it. Access control, deny or allow access to the internet, and we can do a number of filters with the router. Let me bring back in my router simulator, and maybe we can hopefully have a little bit better luck with it. So we're in here with access restrictions, internet access policy. If we go down here, internet access during the selected days and hours, we can allow or deny every day. What do we want to do? Allow or deny. We can allow every day, or we can specify the times, 24 hours a week. We have to set our policy here. If we enable it, we're still not going to get there, but you have to have a policy, edit to list. enabled or denied. What are we going to do with each of those things? And now down here we can do some other denials. The applications, again, we looked at this a little bit earlier, but you can control access using the router. What I want to do, I think, is bring in my router, the one I'm actually using, and this is a Netgear, and each of them is going to look a little bit different. When I go into this one, block services, I can have a service table in my schedule here, days to block every day, Sunday, Monday, all day, start blocking whatever we want to do. And I can either permit or deny. I have my time in here, adjust for daylight savings time. I guess that I should do that, since we just changed daylight savings time last night. So apply whatever I want to do. Block services. Services blocking never per schedule or always what I want to do. Block sites if there are particular sites, keywords to a domain that I want to block, and then parental controls are separately controlled by this thing. So again, we can do a number of things within the router or the access point itself to restrict where our users go, what our users do. We can also turn on or off remote administration on the router so that we can allow things in or not allow things in. So we have looked at those things at the schedules. An access control, MAC address filtering is basic, requires pre-approved authentication. You're going to have to type in all of those MAC addresses, and that's what the pre-approved authentication is. You have to have a list. We turn on MAC filtering and say, hey, nobody can get in except those that are on the list. It's kind of like going to the theater. Only those can get into the theater that have a ticket. The ticket in this case is that you're listed in the MAC authorization table. So we have pre-approved authentication. Difficult to provide temporary access for guest devices. That is true. One of the things that I've noticed in some of the, many of, maybe all of, at least on the one that I bought, the new routers, is that you can activate a guest network, and I've noticed that there are a few guest networks in the neighborhood when I go out and run a wireless scan to see what are available or what shows up when I turn on my laptop. So guest networks make it easier to use MAC address filtering and then allow users to have those things. WEP was intended to guard confidentiality. I say was intended because it never really worked very well. And in some cases, people would say, hey, it was more dangerous to have WEP turned on than have WEP turned off, because if it was turned off, you presumed you were protected, and you probably weren't. If it was turned off, you knew you weren't protected, and you knew that everything that you were sending was plain text. Now, this is traffic within the network. If we went to a secure page, an HTTPS page, the browser is going to do the encryption there, so we would have encrypted traffic in that case. Confidentiality by scrambling the wireless data as it's transmitted, and this just becomes a bunch of gibberish. It uses the 802.11 to encrypt the wireless transmission. So it does encrypt. It is easy to crack that encryption. Cryptography, a little definition here, is the science of transforming information so that it is secure while being transmitted or stored, or we at least presume it's secure while being transmitted or stored. But keep in mind that anything that can be encrypted, that can be decrypted, can be decrypted by somebody that has cracked the encryption. This is the process, process for let me try to get an arrow here. The process for encrypting WEP. We have our clear text, which goes through a cipher, which is going to have a key, going to go through a cipher, and the cipher in this case was RC4 was the algorithm. The algorithm is the mathematics that does it. So we take our plain text, send it through a key with an algorithm. The key is the device or the procedure, the unique character string that we use in this case. And one of the problems with WEP was it didn't have very long keys. What we're going to wind up with is 128-bit minus 24 bits, so that leaves us 104, which is what, like an 14-bit, maybe 14 character key. If we use the 64-bit and we use 24 bits for, this is the easier one to do the mathematics with, we have an initialization vector that goes along with this thing with whatever the key length is, and they were 64 and 128 bits. If we use a 64-bit key with a 24-bit initialization vector, that leaves us 40 bits in order to do the key. That's going to be 5 ASCII characters, 8 bits per character, or 10 hexadecimal characters for the key. Not real long keys. Initialization vectors, I think we come up with about 16 million of them, so they will start repeating, and depending on how they were implemented, they may start repeating sooner than others, and that's where a big part of the vulnerability comes in, because if we detect a collision or 2 initialization vectors that were used in the encryption of 2 different packets, we can use that in order to crack the key. So when we go through this thing, we go through the algorithm, and we come out with, I guess I should go back to my arrow here, huh? We're going to go into the ciphertext, the ciphertext being the gibberish, and then it goes onto the wireless. We go down here, we have ciphertext, we go into the cipher, which is going to be the same algorithm, same key, and once we decrypt it, we have the clear text at the other end of the system. It's designed to meet, supposed to be efficient, portable, optional, reasonably strong, self-synchronizing. And I think one of the keys here that we want to understand, reasonably strong. Reasonably strong meant that it wasn't really designed to resist or to stop a dedicated hacker. It was designed to kind of stop your neighbors from being able to see what was going on. It relies on a secret key shared between the wireless client and the access point. A couple of problems with private key cryptography, symmetric cryptography. A couple of problems. One big problem is being able to get the key out if you have a large number of users, and once you get the key out, how are you going to keep it secret if you have I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 users, and you share this key, then it's probably going to be shared with people that shouldn't have it relatively quickly. So a couple of issues with that. Here we have the 64-bit and the 64-bit and the 128-bit key, and those are really not big keys. And then we also have the capability to use a passphrase. Passphrase probably okay, except there are some limitations, restrictions, vulnerabilities with the pass key protocols then when we use these things. The devices can hold up to 4 shared secrets, and the default shared secret, the default key, the one that the computer uses or the access point uses or the router uses to encrypt its information, can be different from each of these. They all have the keys listed so that if you encrypt with one, the other devices have it so that they can decrypt the information. One of them is designated, again, the default key, and that's the one that will be used to encrypt the data from that particular device. So this is just a a picture here of the keys, and we have these keys on each of the devices, and each of them has a different default key. So you've got the default key here is key 4, up here is key 2, and key 1 on the access point. So each of them has the key. They have to all be in the same order, and you notice that on these devices they are in the same order. So you can't have key 4 in the key 3 position, for instance. So they have to be listed on every device in the same order when we use these things. This is a picture of how this thing works. We have step 1, we have our text. CRC is a cyclical redundancy check, which is going to give us some information about what goes on about the text itself. Okay, so we have the cyclical redundancy check, which is a checksum based on the content. So we do an operation on the system, and based upon the contents we get the cyclical redundancy check. WEP calls it the integrity check value, which is the one over here, the integrity check value, which we're going to use with the text, the CRC, the text, and the initial check value. Then we get the initialization vector plus the secret key, the 24-bit plus the 40-bit. We'll use the 64 since I can do the arithmetic. And then we get a pseudo random number generator. And from that we get a key stream. So the key stream is going to be essentially a series of 1s and 0s equal in length to the text plus the ICV, the integrity check value. The two values, the text plus ICV and the key stream, we created a key stream here with this are combined through the exclusive or the XOR operation to give us the ciphertext. We also have to prepend the initial vector, and that's going to be a plain text. To send it to the other station, we need to send the initial vector. It was used along with the secret key in order to produce the key stream so that it can be decrypted at that location. And this is another one here. We have the IV, the shared secret, RC4. RC4 is the algorithm that we use. We get a key stream, and a key stream takes one character and replaces it with another character, and the output from that is known as the key stream. And this is just another way of showing what we have shown before. The key stream, the text plus the initial the integrity check value. Initial integrity check value gives us the initial vector and the ciphertext, which goes into the RF transmission. Up here we have the RF transmission, the receiving device, the sending device are cut off a little bit up here. And then we take the IV, and the ciphertext goes into the system, goes into RC4. We know the shared secret because that's what this thing is all about. We put the IV in here, and we generate the key stream. The key stream plus the ciphertext is going to equal the text plus the integrity check value. And integrity check value, the CRC, to check the system to be sure that what we got is what we should have. Another picture of what goes on: plain text, CRC, plain text 1, 2. The plain text will get the CRC, and we have plain text and CRC. The initialization vector, the secret key, through the RC4 we get the key stream. We XOR the key stream with the plain text and the CRC to get the ciphertext, and then we send it, the IV and the ciphertext to the other end, and the process gets reversed in order to produce what we want. Authentication, and this is back what we've talked about before. If we're using wired devices, not such a big deal because we can control who goes into the room, who plugs into the network. Much bigger deal in wireless because we have no idea who's actually receiving the signal. So we need to have some method of authenticating users to the wireless access point. Requires the wireless device, not the users, be authenticated prior to connecting to the network. We have two types, and we have this open system here. Really not anything very dramatic. Get back here. Open system here, get my drawing going. Open system means that we just don't do anything. And then we have the shared key authentication. In the security of these devices, we have authentication as well as confidentiality, encryption. So in this case, we can just let whoever selects our SSID onto the network, or we can ask them for a secret key, a shared key, a password of some sort in order to get on. So in the open authentication, what we do is say, I need to connect to SSID Bill. And it comes back and says, okay, you're in, because you knew the SSID. And that's all that you need to do in the open system. If we had some sort of a shared secret, then we would go back to the web process in order to do those things. So in the authentication in this one, let's see if we can get some arrows. Just got to use them. I want to authenticate. Now's a good time for all good men to come to the aid of their country. This is going to be the challenge text. The laptop encrypts the challenge text with the shared key and returns it. If the challenge text encrypted with the shared key is correct, then we say, okay, you're in. If it's not, it's refused access, admittance to the wireless network. Vulnerabilities, security mechanisms prove to be very weak level of security, starting with the length of the keys and working the way up the process, the number of initialization vectors that were available, the collisions that happen, so that what happens if you have collisions, which are two IVs used to encrypt the same data, then if you XOR the two ciphertexts, it's the same as XORing the two plain text, so that you can crack the system in that method. Open system, just a matter of, again, what we're going to do. Regular intervals, like I think every 20 nanoseconds or milliseconds, every 20 milliseconds, the system sends a beacon frame. So beaconing, several ways that can be discovered. Just wait till it sends, which in our case we wouldn't have to wait very long because the machines are much faster than we are. Sends the beacon out, and the SSID is going to be in the beacon. We can scan for wireless devices. Is set to look at these beacon frames contained in the SSID of the wireless LAN. Wireless security sources encourage users to disable the SSID broadcast. One of the places that I worked, we had a whole bunch of wireless networks, and we disabled the SSID broadcast. And I got a hold of one of these little go find wireless, looked like a pen drive, and drove up to one of the sites that had the SSID disabled, and golly, our SSID showed up in there. So the SSID actually shows up in a number of these frames, even if you have it turned off. Can work against the regular user, but it's not going to necessarily be effective against somebody that knows what they're doing is dedicated to finding what's going on in the system. Vendor recommends beaconing of the SSID. You should change the SSID from whatever the default is so that you can actually identify your network. I've always thought something like, get your virus here would be a good SSID. I've seen them on college campuses, North Carolina State, looking at what was available there coming out of the dorms, and one of them was free internet here. So different things, you need to be careful of what you do. And this is the configuration of the system here, the name of the SSID. This is actually going to be manually entered. If we have turned off the SSID in the Windows machine, you're going to have to tell it to connect to the wireless network regardless of whether it's broadcasting the SSID or not. And you have to manually type in the SSID, type of authentication, how it's being used, what are the keys, confirmation of the key, those sorts of things. One of the Windows oddities, I'm trying to think of a word there for that, is that if it's connected to, or it will connect to, a network that's broadcasting the SSID before it will connect to one that's not, even if the one that's not is on the preferred list of networks. So you need to be aware of that and configure based upon those situations. Open system authentication is not always possible or convenient to turn off the beaconing of the SSID. Prevents these devices from roaming, and roaming is going to be a situation from freely roaming, prevents them from freely roaming. Roaming is a situation where we go from one access point to the other. In a large area, we may need to have multiple access points. What roaming allows us to do is go from the connectivity of one access point to the next access point to the next access point without losing our connection. In order for roaming to take place, the SSIDs have to either be broadcasting, or you've got to guess real quick before you get to it and put in the SSID. The other problem with roaming is it tends to be proprietary, so that you really, if you're going to roam, you need all of your access points to be from the same manufacturer. And again, the SSID is easily discovered, and it's going to show up unencrypted eventually. Here we have our roaming, and we have the influence. Let's see if I can really make a mess here. I'll try the freehand. So we have this area in here which is covered by both of these things. So I'll have a strong signal here, boopity boopity boopity, but go from one, the other one's showing up. The one that I'm in is getting weaker and weaker and weaker until the next access point here becomes stronger than this access point, and I'm going to then connect to the stronger access point without losing my connection. You can go from, and may go from, access point to access point, but then you have to reconnect, reestablish. If you're on a web page, you've got to go back to the web page or let the browser reopen it or whatever else. In roaming, you don't lose connectivity. Roaming, when you talk about roaming, think about maybe a warehouse when a fork driver who's connected to finding things, connected to the network, goes from one access point to the other because we have all sorts of obstructions, and we're going to have a large distance here that a single access point probably won't cover. So in roaming, we want to be sure that we can seamlessly go from one to the other. This one shows an authentication if we have the SSID, didn't have the SSID, whatever else. The SSID is T-shirt. We can send a disassociation frame to uh, the machine that is connected to the network. And once we send that disassociation frame, it will disconnect and then reassociate. When it reassociates, it's going to have the SSID in plain text so that we can then detect what its name is if it's turned off. So there are a number of ways in order to get that information. Shared key vulnerabilities, key management, we talked about that. Types of keys, the ways that they can be attacked, brute force, and brute force is where we just keep trying until we figure out something that goes on. And then dictionary attacks. Dictionary attacks where we take words from the dictionary, and an awful lot of people use dictionary words for different things, and those are generally going to be much faster. A brute force attack, we have to generate everything as we go along. In a dictionary attack, we just try words out of a dictionary in order to do that. The attacker can capture the challenge text along with the device's response, the encrypted text plus the vector, and they can mathematically derive the key stream when we do that. This table should be in your book. Open system, the attack sequence, view the SSID, look at the SSID so you can take a look at what goes on with it. Address filtering, large number of MAC addresses, I think we probably have covered that already. Does not provide a means to temporarily allow the guest, although a lot of the new routers, maybe all of the new routers, I haven't obviously surveyed all of them, just the one that I bought, have the ability to have a guest network, which would help you out in this situation. If you have a whole bunch of users, hundreds of users, you're probably going to have a limited MAC address table that you can use, and you're going to have to constantly be adding users and taking users out. The other thing is, and the thing that kind of makes it not all that effective from dedicated hackers, as a MAC address can be spoofed or substituted. Somebody that can monitor your network, find a MAC address that is actually allowed to connect to the network, and then substitute that MAC address for their own and be able to get access, get authenticated if the MAC address filtering is the only thing that you're using for them. Key management really does become a difficult situation if you have a lot of users, because people just can't not tell people things. Vulnerabilities, a lot of those in this book anyway, based on WEP and RC4, how the cipher is implemented, how RC4 is implemented. Again, we have 64-bit key or 128-bit key, which winds up being either a 40, couldn't do the arithmetic a while ago, or a 104-bit key. 40-bit key is not really very big. So that makes this thing to start with fairly weak. So we have the short length default key limits, a 40-bit key, 5 ASCII characters, 8 bits per character, 8 into 40 is 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 would be your key. 104, what is that? 8 is what? Anyhow, 8 is 20, 21, 2, well, ain't it 20? No, it's not either. 1. Can't do the arithmetic, can I? So this one would be what, with the arithmetic, a 13-bit, is that right? 8 3 is 24, 4 and carry 2. 1, 2, 10. So 5 or 13 ASCII characters. Again, not very long keys, because many people have passwords that are longer than that. IVs are 24-bit numbers. IVs would start repeating in fewer than 7 hours, depending on the system, how busy the system is. It can be a lot less time than that. And there are other ways to attack it. Creates a detectable pattern, and anything that has a detectable pattern is going to be considered a weak key. Here it says some wireless systems always start with the same initialization vector. That really makes it random. Collisions, 2 packets encrypted using the same initialization vector is going to be an issue. The key stream attack determines the key stream by analyzing 2 colliding packets, 2 packets that have the same initialization vector. And here we have plain text. XOR with the key streams can give us a ciphertext. We have ciphertext A and ciphertext B, and we XOR them. When we XOR the 2 ciphertexts, we get the same value as if we XOR the 2 plain text. So by using the key stream, once you get the collision, you can crack the system by doing this. Since the initialization vector changes regularly, you actually have a different encryption key for each packet typically. But when you use up all those initialization vectors and you start reusing them, that's when you get into the situation of having the collisions and being able to then go back and crack the shared secret. This is another one, the plain text key stream, the ciphertext, plain text 1, plain text 2, and again ciphertext 1 XOR'd with ciphertext 2 in its collision. We're going to get the same value as if we XOR'd the plain texts, so that we can work our way backwards on those and get the encryption. RC4 uses a pseudo random number generator to create the key stream, doesn't create a true random number. That's going to be an issue. We really need randomness in this thing. The first 256 bytes of the cipher can be determined by the bytes in the key itself, and the RC4 source code has been revealed. The attackers can see how the key stream itself is generated, which means that once that happens, then it becomes not a very good thing for us. Attack tools: air snort, air crack, chop, web cracker, web crack. A number of different tools, a number of videos on YouTube on how to crack web. You can get it through bootable Linux live CDs in order to do that, to find those tools. A number of CDs are available with an awful lot of tools on them that you can use to check out your own network. But keep in mind that if you cross the line and go on somebody else's network, then you've violated the law. Of the live CDs that have these tools on them, Backtrack, and there's a new one whose name doesn't come to me right now, is one of the most effective live DVDs available. You can also make it a live flash drive, a bootable flash drive. It's got enough tools to probably keep you occupied for about 1.5 lifetimes, I think. A weak key: the default keys are shortened to the WEP stuff, 40 or 104 bits. The collisions and then RC4 generates weak keys. WEP 2 was an attempt to make WEP better. It increased the key length to 128 bits, used Kerberos for the authentication system, but when you introduced Kerberos, you also introduced other possibilities for cracking the system, one of which was a whole new set of dictionary attacks. I think one of the things said that probably, I don't know, 20, 30, 40, 50% of the Kerberos passwords could be cracked using dictionary attacks. Kerberos, developed by MIT, is the authentication protocol that's used by Active Directory. It is used by Linux. It's an excellent protocol, and typically in all of these things, it's the way it's implemented can cause us some problems. It's based on the use of tickets, which you go to the authentication server and it sends you a ticket granting ticket. Once you get a ticket, that has a list of what you can and can't do, or actually what you can do, and anything that's not on the list you can't do, so that you present your ticket when you want to use a resource. WEP 2 really no more secure than WEP itself. Dynamic WEP solves the weak IV problem by rotating the keys frequently, and in it we have different keys for unicast and broadcast. The advantage, it can be implemented without upgrading the device drivers or the AP firmware, and that's when you go from WEP to WPA. It's not like, oh, I just want to start using WPA. You're going to have to upgrade your equipment to the new security protocols. So it was a no-cost solution, made things a little bit better, but it again is only the partial solution. And here we have is changing keys. So when we go into this thing, we have unicast keys on laptop A. That's not really what I wanted to do. Let's try that again. Unicast keys on laptop A. I want to get my arrow here. And on laptop B. And down here, broadcast and unicast for each of these things. So we have different broadcast keys and different unicast keys. And you notice that these keys are for the different laptops are different. So when we do this, it made things a little bit better. The preferred, I believe now, encryption protocol, the preferred security protocol for wireless is going to be WPA2, which implements the AES protocol instead of the RC4. Summary: it's important to protect the wireless local area networks. In order to protect it, you need to know the vulnerabilities, but understand how the process works, what's available if somebody is sniffing your network. Because if somebody's sniffing your wireless network, it's going to be difficult to detect that they are listening passively. It's kind of like listening to a radio station. They don't know who the heck's listening to them. Protection categories: access control, WEP, and authentication. And then the wireless access control is accomplished by limiting devices' access to the access point. We can use MAC filtering. The best thing later on is going to be if we can use enterprise level security in order to do those things. Wireless authentication, the wireless devices, a number of different things. WEP, authorized parties, whatever we're going to do with those things. Security vulnerabilities, there are many, and we have to go on and on and on. I'm sure there are going to be more and more and more of them. WEP 2 and dynamic WEP. WEP, basically, when you hear WEP, cringe, turn it off, get a device that will use a better protocol. Back to TJX Corporation, all the credit cards that they lost. They didn't want to have the expense of upgrading their access points from WEP to WPA2 so that they could use enterprise level security on those things, and as a result it wound up costing them more by not doing the right thing, by not making the networks more secure. So with that, I would like to thank you for listening.